Hello, and welcome to M4LU, presented by Moms for Liberty. We're here to translate complex topics into more easily understood content, giving you, the parents, grandparents, and every American citizen, the key facts and information you need to empower you to fight back against government overreach, especially as it impacts our kids in schools. Hi, I'm Melissa Karwowski, Program Director of M4LU. Each month, we'll focus on a single topic, ideology, or issue that impacts our kids, schools, and communities. We'll approach it from multiple angles, starting with a 101 intro lecture, followed by a 102 course that goes a little deeper on the topic. If available, we'll do a virtual watch party of a film relating to the topic, and finally culminate with a monthly book club discussion. Best of all, every event will have live Q&A with experts in the field to help us make sense of it all. We understand this can be a lot to digest, but don't worry, we've got your back. You'll find a corresponding toolkit in the resource library at m4lu.org. In addition to recordings of all monthly events, each toolkit will include a curated smart book, presentation slides that can be used at chapter meetings, related white papers, articles, podcasts, and so much more. Now, before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. Depending on what device you are using, there should be an audience chat and Q&A feature at the right of your screen. Please comment, interact with your fellow audience members, and be sure to submit those questions to our amazing guests. It is so valuable to get this direct interaction with them, so please take advantage of it. As a warning, rude or demeaning comments will get you removed from this event, and you will not be permitted to re-enter. Now, of course, the legal reminder that the opinions of the guests and any media content shared are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of M4LU or Moms for Liberty. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please like, share, and subscribe to help spread the word and support our mission. We try to keep our resources affordable and accessible to all, but if you would like to donate, please visit m4lu.org. Thank you again. Now let's jump over to the event. Hello and welcome to M4LU's first event in April. I'm so excited. This year we have already covered some incredible topics. In January, we talked about social emotional learning, or SEL. In February, we covered CRT and DEI, and then we just finished up March talking about restorative justice. So with a new month comes a new topic, and I'm particularly excited about this topic because this really was my red pill moment. This is the one that really sent me down the rabbit hole and got me looking into under the covers, behind the curtain, seeing all the things that were really going on in our country. So April's topic is gender ideology, and you are at the Gender 101 in Studio event, live from our lovely studio here in Brentwood, Tennessee. So before we get started, just a couple things. For our in-studio audience, you might want to silence or turn down your phone notifications so that doesn't interrupt. And just like we saw in the introduction, we do ask for all viewers, please feel free to comment, interact with other viewers, and then submit your questions with the Q&A feature so that we can get them to our incredible guests. Now, before we dive in, before we get started, I just want to remind you how the event will go. Tonight, we're going to start with 3 20-minute lectures. Then after everyone presents, we'll pull everyone back up on the stage and have a live Q&A session. That's about 45 minutes or so, where we will take questions from our in-studio audience as well as from our live viewers online. Before we officially get started into our presentations, though, let's take a quick minute and see what the man on the street knows about gender ideology as we check in with Christy Slape, our mom on a mission from Williamson County, Texas.
Howdy, y'all. This is Christy, mom on a mission with Moms for Liberty. Today, we're on the square in Georgetown at the historic Williamson County Courthouse, asking people what they know about gender ideology. Let's go. Hi, what's your name?
Barbara Desjardins.
I'm David.
David?
I'm Emma. Megan.
Today we're out asking people what they know about gender ideology. So when you hear gender, do you think of 2 genders or 100 or more genders?
Just 2.
Just 2 genders. I'm a mom, I have kids in school, and what we're learning is that a lot of young kids are learning that they can be a boy, a girl, neither or both. What do y'all think about that?
There's only 2 genders.
I agree. I think there's only 2 genders, and I think the rest is nonsense. I'm the same way. I think there's only 2 genders.
So how many genders are there?
2.
Do you think that parents, teachers, or anyone else should be teaching children about sexuality and gender?
Primarily parents. If it's going to be in the schools, I don't think it should be in the lower grades. They don't need to burden children, put those ideas in their heads.
How do you feel about a library book for elementary school kids that tells them they can be a boy, a girl, neither or both?
Again, I just don't think that should be there. They don't need to see it. They don't need to see pictures. That even puts things into their heads even worse. They don't need to be concerned about all of that. They need to be learning to read. The state of Texas is terrible with their education as it is.
What are children supposed to be learning in schools, ideally in elementary school?
In regards to the sexual education.
No, just in general, like what are schools for?
Math, English, and, simple hygiene.
Yeah. Have you ever seen this genderbread person?
Never seen that.
Okay, this is something that is used by therapists, some teachers that want kids to express themselves. They are taught to, whatever's in your brain, what your identity is, who you're attracted to, your sex, your body parts, all of that. It's basically just a formula, and it helps you decide what kind of, gender you are. What do y'all think about this?
That looks
something
insane.
CNN would put on their website.
Can you repeat that?
Something CNN would put on their website.
Okay, well, if y'all don't like this, what do you think about the gender unicorn? Hold on just a second. It gets better. Your gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, physically. Yeah, right.
And of course, sex education is a part of something we do as children, but this never begins with that. First, we teach in elementary is like your boundaries, and you can stand your ground, stand your ground is something you teach children in Texas.
Yeah.
What makes me really unhappy about this picture particularly is drawing some specific pictures on parts that we teach children have to be private and have to belong only to them.
This is a book I found in a Georgetown elementary school. It's called It Feels Good to Be Yourself, a book about gender identity. This is in an elementary library. Let me show you what the tagline for the book is. It says, "Some people are boys, some people are girls, some people are both, neither or somewhere in between. This straightforward exploration of gender identity will give children a fuller understanding of themselves and others." How about that?
I don't like that.
No, that's something.
Is this a book you'll buy for your kids someday?
Never.
Definitely not.
This is not something to be exposed to kindergarten or like 3rd grade children. I know that Brushy Creek Elementary had a huge blast this year because they have opened a gender-neutral toilets. Do you know the
I know about the bathroom. It's their new addition, and the bathroom is totally open where anyone can make their way into any bathroom.
And the kids were really uncomfortable with this. And this was not like the parents uncomfortable with this. This was the children.
What do you think of when you see that rainbow flag that has, all of the different colors on it? What do y'all think about that?
If it's on your property and you're doing your own thing, feel free by all means, do what you want. But I don't believe it should be around kids or in the school system at all.
Sounds like you believe in individual freedom.
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. Okay, what do y'all think?
I mean, I agree. I think it's just really complicated, and I don't think it should be.
You think that flag should be hanging in a classroom in a school?
Absolutely not.
What flag do you think would be appropriate to have in a classroom in the state of Texas?
The American flag and the Texas flag.
All right, y'all are my kind of people. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Y'all have a good spring break. Thank you again so much. We need to connect. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Mom on a Mission. Join us next month when we ask people what they know about comprehensive sex education. And for more information, visit M4LU.org.
Well, that was quite an interesting interview with some folks on the street. I know some people knew a lot about it, some people knew none of it, and I think I was certainly one of those people who didn't know that this was being taught in our schools. And that I remember, I guess it was around when the whole Caitlyn Jenner fiasco, that it really came onto my radar, and I just felt like I was living in an alternate universe, and it couldn't really be real. And then it just picked up steam and became more and more common in society overall, and pretty soon it was everywhere. What really hit it home, though, was reading Abigail Schreier's Irreversible Damage book, and my mind was absolutely blown. And if you have not read that book, I strongly encourage it. It is listed on our recommended reading at m4lu.org for this month. It is absolutely incredible. So without further ado, I'm excited to dive in and bring up our first speaker, who is Logan Lansing. And he is an author, speaker, and the founder of itsnotinschools.com. He's best known for his latest book, The Queering of the American Child: How a New School Religious Cult Poisons the Minds and Bodies of Normal Kids. Lansing has appeared on Jordan B. Peterson podcast and American Thought Leaders, and is known for his public lectures on critical race theory, culturally relevant pedagogy, and queer theory. Lansing's website explains what those woke theories are, where they come from, and what they are doing to children in classrooms nationwide. Tonight, he's going to be presenting especially on queer theory, which really paved the way for gender ideology to be accepted and more common in our schools. So without further ado, please help me welcome Logan Lansing.
I need that. Those lights are bright. Hello, everyone. By a quick show of hands, how many of you have children or know someone who does? Excellent. I'm at the right place. Okay, it's an honor to be here for this Moms for Liberty University event, primarily because I am a parent and a father myself, and I've been through a whirlwind few years, as I'm sure many of you or all of you have been. So thank you for having me to talk about queer theory, which is a topic that can get out of hand very quickly. So I'm going to try and stay on task and get through what I've got to get through. In 2002, a highly influential and very well-cited academic and educator named Kevin Kumashiro published a paper called Against Repetition. Against Repetition. And in that paper, Kevin Kumashiro, over 20 years ago, said this, quote, "Educators not only have a responsibility to draw students into a possible crisis, but also to structure experiences to help them resolve their crisis productively," end quote. He said educators have a responsibility to draw students into a crisis. Wow. He then followed that up with queer teaching and learning always works through crisis. The goal, he says, is to continue teaching and learning through crisis, to continue experiencing the queer. Now, by the end of my talk, I hope we can understand what that really means. I think it's pretty clear, but we'll have a deeper understanding of it by the time I'm through with my talk. Now, I came into Kevin Kumashiro's work back in 2020 because I was preparing to be a father for the first time. I was preparing to be a father. I took that responsibility very seriously, and I had a big question that was burning at me. And that question is, what the hell is going on in education? Why are the schools acting so insane? That was my guiding question back in 2020 when I stumbled into Kumashiro's work. Back when I was a kid, which wasn't all that long ago, and I'm sure back when you were children, we didn't have gender identities. We did not identify with genders. That was a completely alien concept. Gender identity did not exist for all intents and purposes. Now, technically, it did exist. It was popularized in the 1960s by Stoller and Greenson. But if you go back and read their original paper, you can it's certain that what they meant by gender identity was sex identity. They defined gender identity as the sense of knowing to which sex one belongs. Knowing to which sex one belongs. So for them, there were only two options, male and female, based in reality. And if I, as a male, who I am male, if I thought for some reason I was female or I did not know I was male, there's an issue there, and we should investigate that. I think they had good intentions. It's not clear why they used the word gender at all. My best guess is that proto-queer theory was in the air, and a lot of academics were working on what would later become queer theory. And Stoller and Greenson did not know they needed to be absolutely precise with the language that they used. And this is a lesson I think all of us have learned over the last few years. When you're dealing with this stuff, you have to be clinical with the language you use or you're going to get taken on a ride. And I think that's what happened to them. But as an aside, we didn't have gender identities. We also were not politically awakened in 4th grade. We didn't do BLM rallies in school. We didn't each have our own personal flags. Our teachers were not discussing current political events and topics in math class. None of that stuff was happening. And my female classmates especially, happens to males too, but my female classmates were not being told that they may have been born in the wrong body because they like to play flag football with the boys on recess. My classmates were not told that there's this pathway they can go down of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones that, for females at least, ultimately ends up in seeking out elective double mastectomy procedures to remove healthy breast tissue as part of a gender-affirming care plan to rectify your sex and your gender identity. If our educators would have talked to us like that when we were in school, we would have looked at them like they're speaking an alien language. They might as well have just rolled out the papyrus and started writing in hieroglyphics, and we would have understood that as well as we understand this terminology. So our educators were not talking like that. Now they are. Something happened in the interim. I promise you, we were not graced from the heavens by queer theory. Okay, it came from somewhere. So in 2020, I was overcome by some serious questions that I needed answers to. What is this that I'm looking at? In 2020, I didn't know queer theory is a thing, but I was like, what is this? This is new. This wasn't here when I was in school, so what is it? Who put it in schools? Who created it and who put it in schools? And what was their intention behind putting it in schools? And when I looked out, especially in the mainstream media, I felt like I was being gaslit about my questions. I didn't realize back in 2020 the extent to which I was being gaslit about none of this happening in schools and not being an issue. I do now. But I also felt like a lot of the names that I trusted were not giving me sufficient answers. It seemed like a lot of reaction. A lot of people were reacting. Oh my gosh, they're doing something crazy in the schools today. Anyway, on to the next thing. Oh my gosh, they're doing something crazy in the schools again today. On to the next thing. I didn't have the answers that I needed. So I did the only thing I really knew how to do in this situation, which was to start reading. I'm not an academic. I, at the time, was not an author or a researcher, but I knew I could read. So I started diving into the literature. You'll notice that with the genderbread unicorn and all of these resources and cute cartoons they give to kids in school, they all usually have some sort of citations or some original point you can go and look at. So that's what I did. And I came into Kevin Kumashiro's work that way, reading that educators have a responsibility to draw students into crisis. I didn't know what the heck he was talking about in the rest of the paper. I had no clue. It was a foreign language to me. I just knew when I read those words, that's wicked and evil. How have we not known about this for the last 20 years? How did this go over everyone's heads? And I went on to read and read and read, and I read some other crazy stuff too. I read academics, one of them, her name is Hannah Dyer, talking about how the concept of an innocent child is a social construction. It's a social fiction made up in society. It does not exist, is what she was arguing, and her colleagues in the field are arguing. The concept of an innocent child does not exist. It's a social fiction created by dominant groups who have all of the power and privilege, creating this concept of an innocent child and putting everything into that concept that they want to protect to the exclusion, you hear that word a lot in the queer theory literature, to the exclusion of everything they didn't want to protect. I read that. That was crazy. I also read math teachers talking about using math class as a mediator for political literacy. So instead of learning math and fractions and long division and all of that stuff, she was using her math class as a mediator for political awakening, a way to help children understand they have gender identities and they can identify as various genders, and not just papers, entire books. Queering critical literacy and numeracy for social justice. Yep, that's the one. If you've got some free time on a Sunday and you want to have a wild ride, feel free, be my guest and dive in. And that one, the educator wrote a whole book about how she uses her math for a cause class to teach children about things like gender identity. One of the research projects her 4th and 5th graders did was look into suicide rates between states based on marriage equality laws. So rather than doing addition, whatever you do, it's been a while, whatever you do in 4th and 5th grade, they were not doing what we did. They were not learning math. She admits in her paper, she says, the students usually do not finish their math problems. No duh, like obviously. So I read a lot of crazy stuff. When I was reading Kevin Kumashiro's work, I read the drag pedagogy paper. You may be familiar with that, where that was the impetus for getting drag queens into schools and lunchrooms and cafeterias, and the paper ends with saying we're going to leave a trail of glitter that will never come out of the carpet. That's what I read in 2020. And as I was doing my reading, I read a lot. I answered some of my questions. The first one was, okay, this thing has a name and it's called queer theory. It has a name. And the second was, all of these people I'm reading are saying they are practicing queer theory in schools. They're practicing it with children in schools. Now, that does not mean that they were saying we're teaching queer theory to kids. We're not talking about Simone de Beauvoir saying one is not born but becomes a woman, and that turning into what can probably be best summarized as Michel Foucault's work of one is not born but becomes a homosexual, or what would ultimately become someone like Judith Butler's work where one is not born but becomes normal. They're not teaching the founding figures and how it developed and some internal debates. They're teaching children how to live it. They're teaching children how to put on the queer theory glasses and view all of their lives, actions, and behaviors through the doctrine of queer theory. If you're religious, you may teach the Bible at home, and you read the children with your Bible and talk to them about how they should live their life or what the Bible tells them. And queer theory does the same thing, but with their doctrine. So it's something the children are meant to take with them. It's an all-encompassing worldview that guides all of their actions. So these educators I was reading were saying, we're practicing queer theory on children. I did not come to this conclusion on my own. I just read their work. I think I was just one of the few people who opened up their books and said, let's take a deep dive and start reading what these people are saying. And I founded itsnotinschools.com because I've been gaslit for years by people saying none of this stuff is in schools, or it's not really a problem, and what are you talking about? And that quickly evaporated when I started reading this stuff, because I learned that queer theory got its name at a conference in 1990 in California. Teresa de la Reyes coined it. And within 3 years, educators in Canada had their hands on it and were writing one of the first big educational papers about putting queer theory into schools. In Canada, Mary Kay Bryson and Susan DeCastle wrote a paper called Querying Pedagogy, Praxis Makes Imperfect. They think they're so clever with words. Querying pedagogy, which is teaching practices. Praxis is one of those Marxist buzzwords. As soon as you see it, you know you're dealing with some crazy stuff. And then imperfect had a hyphen in it, so it's I'm perfect. It's all so dumb. But in 1993, they wrote this paper and they said, we're taking queer theory and we're figuring out how to teach it to children, how to help them live by it, embody the doctrine. And they defined their queer pedagogy, which is teaching queer theory to kids, as, quote, to deliberately interfere with and intervene in the production of normalcy in schooled subjects. Now, what this commie gobbledygook means is they're getting queer theory into schools to make sure children do not turn out normal. They're deliberately interfering with education and intervening in children's education to make sure the schools do not produce normal children. We'll understand that a bit more by the time I'm done. But you know, I read that. I was like, oh my, everyone's telling me this stuff's not in schools. These people in 1993 are telling me it is. They're saying they're putting it in there. Within just 2 years, in 1995, which not coincidentally, of my opinion, is Gloria Ladson-Billings is publishing Towards a Culturally Relevant Pedagogy. And in that same year with William Tate IV, she's publishing Towards a Critical Race Theory of Education, because we know that's not in schools either, even though they were writing in 1995 about placing it into schools. But that same year, Deborah P. Britzman, another queer theorist, she's a psychoanalyst too, which is scary to think that psychoanalysts are getting their hands on this and thinking how to best apply this to children's education. She is saying the goal is to proliferate identifications, which just means let's get this into schools and teach kids how to identify as many things as possible. Anything but being a normal boy or a normal girl. Her paper is about making as many identities as humanly possible, as long as it's not the normal ones of boy or girl, and allowing children to choose one of them. Absolutely ridiculous. And within 4 years of that paper, in 1999, so less than 10 years after queer theory has its name, it's so not in schools that James T. Sears is publishing an edited volume of educators talking about how successful they are with queer theory in schools. Educators talking about how to best apply it with their students and teach its principles. By 1999, it's so not in schools that that edited volume was titled Queering Elementary Education. Queering Elementary Education in 1999. Was absolutely shocked when I started reading this chronologically after people for so many years have said it's not in schools and you're a crazy person. So then we get to Kevin Kumashiro's work, and from there things really explode. There's many different reasons. My opinion is social media plays a big one. The Obama administration is a big one too. There were some Dear Colleague letters that went out that introduced the language of gender identity that were really hidden under the auspice of sexual harassment based on one's sex, and they got gender identity in there. So a lot of things happen from that point. It really explodes from there. But the big thing I learned was educators in their own words were saying, there's this thing called queer theory, and we're practicing it on kids in schools, and they write thousands upon thousands upon thousands of pages about doing it. I read a lot of it for a book I published last year called The Queering of the American Child. There's a lot of stuff in there if you want to pick up a copy. It's available at fine bookstores everywhere as long as it's Amazon. I think you can get it on like Walmart and Target and stuff, but the easiest way is Amazon. And if you're interested in all of those references and reading more of those papers or learning more, you can pick up a copy of that book. But I learned there was queer theory and they were practicing it in schools with kids, which leads me to the big part of my talk, which is what is queer theory's central claim? What is the thing children are meant to walk away with? And the central claim is children are meant to understand that they are queer. Everyone, according to queer theory, is meant to understand that you are queer. All of us are queer. That's queer theory's main claim. So we need to talk about what does queer mean. It does not mean gay or lesbian. I have to say this at all of my talks. It's almost frustrating at this point, but queer theory hides behind people who happen to be gay or lesbian in the same way that critical race theory hides behind Black Americans to advance its radical agenda. So queer theory has nothing to do with being gay or lesbian. Technically, that's because queer theory argues you cannot be gay, you cannot be lesbian, you cannot be straight, you cannot be, as an essential quality of your person, any of these things. You can't be male, you can't be female, there is nothing there. That's the technical reason. The reason that most of the activists at the ground level argue it is because if people are stabilized and lead happy, healthy, and normal lives, they don't pick up pitchforks, and you can't manipulate them to go tear society apart. You can't get them to do revolution. Revolutions require instability to work, and if people who happen to be gay or lesbian are getting on and living happy, healthy, normal lives just as anyone else would, queer theory loses that radical, revolutionary potential energy that it would otherwise have. So those are the two reasons. With that out of the way, what does it mean to be queer? That is defined by David Halperin in 1995 in his book Saint Foucault Towards a Gay Hagiography. And in that book, and this is going to be a mouthful, I will explain it right after I get through it, but please afford me the opportunity. Halperin says this, quote, unlike gay identity, so as I was just saying, queer identity need not be grounded in any positive truth or in any stable reality. It acquires its meaning from its... Sorry, I muted it. Sorry. Queer identity acquires its meaning from its oppositional relation to the norm. It is by definition whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, and the dominant. There is nothing in particular to which it necessarily refers. It is an identity without an essence. Okay, now we'll go back and explain it. So unlike gay identity, as I explained, queer theory and being queer has no relationship to the truth. For queer theory, there is no such thing as truth, capital T truth, that we're all, with reason and our rational faculties, able to go and discover in the world. Queer theory, at the outset, from the very inception, disregards that idea. There's no truth. And there's no stable reality. It's built on perpetually shifting sands forever. It has no relationship to stable reality at all. The second something becomes stable, they need to queer it more, so it becomes unstable. It's a revolution that never ends. I like to say that in queer theory, today's revolutionary is tomorrow's conservative, because the train never stops. If you think you're a radical today, tomorrow you're going to be left behind by someone who's more radical than you. It acquires its meaning from its oppositional relation to the norm. It is by definition whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate, and the dominant. That's the big kicker. What that tells us is queer is not an identity at all. It's an orientation one adopts in the world against all positive truth and all stable reality. It's a political stance you take on. I've seen people confused now for the last couple of years about Queers for Palestine and that movement, saying that's clearly contradictory. What is this all about? Queer theory will attach it to anything that is a destabilizing movement. Anything whatsoever. It makes perfect sense once you realize when they say, I'm queer, that's the same as someone who happens to be a conservative or a Republican saying, I'm conservative or I'm Republican. Or a person who's a Democrat saying, I'm a small L liberal, I'm a Democrat. For them, it's, no, I'm queer. I'm against all stable reality. My entire worldview is built on perpetually shifting sands, and there is no essential quality to any of us. An identity without an essence. That's why I said queer theory does not believe you can be gay or straight or lesbian or anything, male, female, nothing. It's the most blank slateism you could ever possibly encounter. And that's what the educators were telling me they were practicing with children, getting children to walk away, the entire educational environment designed to help children adopt that doctrine and that belief and walk into the world with it to destabilize everything, which was absolutely insane when I first read it. And it's still insane to this day to think about it. Like I said, if you want to learn more about that intellectual lineage and that tradition and how it's applied in schools by the educators who are doing it, The Queering of the American Child is available out there. And I think in that book, we've got something over 200 citations, and like 99% of them are from educators, their papers, in their words, talking about what they're doing. So please consider looking at that if you're interested in learning more, and I hope this information was helpful. We've got a lot of kids to protect because this is a big problem that really, on the time scale we're on, doesn't change with the White House. So have at it with what you will, but thank you.
Wow. So one of the things that I love so much about that, thank you, Logan, so much, that was so good, is it really helped answer for me one of those most basic questions of why is this happening? Because it's almost a joke now. Everyone, it's like the open secret that everyone knows and just accepts that schools aren't working. You can ask anyone, oh, how are the schools doing? They're doing terrible. Kids don't know anything. We have the worst scores so terrible scores across the world. But it's like it's just accepted, like that's just okay. The thing is, it's intentional. That was so shocking to me when I found this out, but it helped me finally understand why this was a thing. So I really appreciate that. One of the things that I think I'm always going to remember, perpetually shifting sands, that's such a good way to say it. I really appreciate that. Okay, now I'm really excited to move on to our next speaker. who now you'll see how that this foundation, it really laid, I'm sorry, the queer theory laid the foundation that made it accessible or easier for gender ideology to take over the world. It started with trans activism and how that led to a social contagion that has really swept across the world and created a medical crisis, which is what our next guest will be speaking on. Mia Hughes is a senior fellow of the Macdonald Laurier Institute in Ottawa and director of GenSpect Canada. She is the author of the WPATH Files and specializes in researching the scandal of pediatric gender medicine, social contagions, and psychiatric epidemics. I can say I am personally thankful that I was born in this generation and not, I'm sorry, in a previous generation and not in this generation, because I was a tomboy. And I was so proud of being a tomboy and a fast tree climber, and I ran so fast, and I was definitely very uncomfortable in puberty. So I think I could have very easily been caught up in this social contagion that is happening now. And so please help me welcome Mia Hughes.
So I have slides. Thank you all for being here. My talk today, oh there it is. So my talk today is going to be about, it's not on? I don't think it's on. Is it on? How's that? So I have to stay this close? Okay, let's start again. So my talk today is, I think it's great that Logan and I are at the same event, because he's just given you one timeline and now I'm going to give you a parallel timeline. Mine is going to focus on trans activism and how it created a medical catastrophe. Oh, my little signal didn't work. There we go. So on the screen here, you can see evidence of an epidemic. There's referrals to a pediatric gender clinic in Canada, one in Spain, one in the United Kingdom, and then for the United States, it's the surge in diagnoses of gender dysphoria. And anyone who's not blinded by ideology can see that we're dealing with an epidemic. And this epidemic began very clearly. There's an inflection point in 2014, 2015. So in a sane world, I would not need to be standing here talking to you all and explaining what happened, because in a sane world, the moment this epidemic began, the medical world and the mental health world would have leapt into action, scrambled to find out what the trigger was, and would have done everything in their power to quench the flames of the contagion. And we all know that they did not do that. And there's a simple answer for why this epidemic began, and there's a far more complicated one. So the simple answer is this. If you can see on the screen here, in 2014, the modern trans rights movement began. It began the most aggressive, relentless messaging campaign of any supposed civil rights movement ever. You've got Laverne Cox on the cover of Time magazine in 2014. The transgender tipping point, America's next civil rights frontier. Then in 2015, Caitlyn Jenner is supposedly Woman of the Year. And in the bottom corner there, it's really important, I Am Jazz, the reality TV show I Am Jazz, started in 2015, and this is a reality TV show that follows Jazz Jennings, a little boy who liked Barbie dolls and a sparkly bathing suit, so his mother told him he was a girl, raised him as a girl, and this reality TV show follows his journey as one of the earliest participants of the atrocious puberty suppression experiment. But there's another explanation. First of all, why did we become a society that thought we should celebrate people who clearly have some sort of psychiatric disorder or perhaps paraphilic desire? Why are we putting them on the cover of a magazine? Why did we think it was acceptable to celebrate people becoming lifelong medical patients? And particularly, why did we become a nation, a culture that celebrated that happening to children? And the answer is modern transactivism. And the answer, but the real answer is gender identity ideology. And so, first of all, what is gender identity ideology? It's a belief system that states that we all possess a gender identity. I'll try and define it. It's something like your internal sense of gendered self. It's your internal way of knowing whether you're male, female, both, neither, something else entirely. Obviously, it's completely pseudoscientific and nonsense, so there's no clear way to define it. But crucially, with gender identity ideology, it is your gender identity that defines whether you are a man, woman, boy, or girl. Which is a mad idea, of course, and you can see why this ideology would untether people from reality. And so, why? Who came up with it and what's the purpose? This is the interesting part. So, the modern trans rights movement created gender identity ideology as we know it. I know we talk about Robert Stoller, John Money, those guys in the 60s, but the modern iteration of it is your gender identity that makes you a man or a woman. That is the work of modern transactivism. And the reason why modern transactivism did this, and this is, I'm talking the 1980s, was when the trans rights movement was forming. The reason they did it, it serves two purposes. First and foremost, it makes being transgender perfectly natural and healthy. So instead of, in the 1980s, modern transactivism had a choice. They could base the rights movement in reality. They're gearing up. They know that they're going to do the trans rights movement. They can base it in reality, but that's going to be a really hard sell. Because in the 1980s, the two groups who identified as transgender were autogynephilic men. So these are men with a paraphilia in which they are aroused by the fantasy of becoming women, the fantasy of having female bodily functions and female body parts. And then the other group is extremely gender non-conforming homosexuals who are experiencing, I think most likely they're experiencing homophobia in the world because it's difficult to be really gender non-conforming, and so they seek a medical solution to alleviate their suffering. And those are the two groups. So if trans activism had based their rights movement in reality, they'd have to sell a fetish, a paraphilia to the world, and that's not going to be very easy. So instead, they did something really bold. They created a whole new reality using gender identity ideology. So it reframes being transgender as perfectly natural and healthy. He's not a paraphilic man anymore. He's a man with a female gender identity, and it's much more sanitized and it's much easier to sell. And as well, it solves another problem for them, because these are people who really want to be members of the opposite sex. And so gender identity ideology enables them to become members of the opposite sex. Now these men really are women. They're not men who identify as women. They're actually women. So in the 1980s, 1990s, it's all going on behind the scenes. Nobody knew this was happening. Nobody knew that there was a whole group of trans-identified people who were scheming behind the scenes. I bet nobody in this room has heard of the International Bill of Gender Rights that was drawn up in 1993 in Texas that sort of solidified the concept of gender identity. And then they're all scheming and they're getting this new reality ready. In 2006, they have another big pivotal moment, and this is a group of trans activists and human rights lawyers. They met in the city of Yogyakarta in Indonesia, and they drew up the Yogyakarta Principles. And again, this is just solidifying. It's kind of like a blueprint for nations when they're getting ready to launch, and they know that when they launch, they're going to want nations to protect gender identity in law. So they draw up this blueprint that nations can use to develop their own legislation. Okay, so bringing it now to, we're around 2014, 2015. A crucial thing to understand is gay rights was one, marriage equality was one, and all of these LGBT, gay rights charities, NGOs, they need another funding source. And it's perfect. Along comes the tea, they add the tea, and then they start these intense messaging campaigns. We all woke up one day in 2014 and trans women were women, and you were a really bad person if you disagreed. And looking at the images, looking at the t-shirt that lady's wearing, you can see why they didn't base their rights movement in reality. Because if they had, that t-shirt would say, trans women are paraphilic men who are aroused by the fantasy of having menstrual periods. And it's not going to be an easy sell. It's nowhere near as catchy, and it's not going to fit on a t-shirt. So you can see why they had to go with this whole new reality. Okay. But it's not just, it was bewildering enough for adults, for all of us to wake up in the mid-2010s and suddenly men or women, you're a bad person if you disagree. But because it's an entirely new reality, it's not just adults who have to live in it. Children and adolescents have to live in this new reality as well. And incredibly, so there are 5 factors that I consider to be the perfect storm. How we ended up untethering an entire generation of young people from the reality of their body, and a whole bunch want body parts chopped off. The first thing, and it will never cease to amaze me, it's continually astonishing to me that in 2011, there's that genderbread person again that we were talking about earlier. The genderbread person teaches children that they each have a gender identity, and that's what makes them boys or girls. And that was created in 2011, and so the 2010s, we just injected gender identity ideology into our education system. And no one stopped to think, what's going to happen if we teach children this completely pseudo-scientific ideological belief system that has no grounding in reality and untethers them completely from their sexed bodies? Then, as if that weren't bad enough, we have the media is just saturated. So we have Caitlyn Jenner, we have, Laverne Cox, all the rest of them, but they're also targeting children. This new type of person is being bombarded in television shows, like children's television shows, children's books. There's hundreds and hundreds of books that teach children that they can have a gender identity that doesn't match their body, that they can be a girl, there's the I Am Jazz, the book, a famous line in I Am Jazz is, I have a girl brain but a boy body, that's what it means to be transgender. Just outrageously pseudo-scientific nonsense. I'm going to skip over WPATH and I'll come back in a minute. Then this is the perfect storm that I'm talking about. So just as society is untethered from reality, and just as it's bombarding kids with this completely absurd idea that they can have mismatched gender souls in their body, the smartphone is invented, and then along comes social media, providing the absolute perfect super spreading environment for this terrible idea and for this trans identities. A kid can go online, an adolescent can go online. There are YouTube trans influencers. They can watch people talking about how wonderful it is to transition. I chose TikTok, the logo, because I think that's the absolute worst possible platform for this social contagion. There are hundreds and hundreds, thousands of young people, young girls, like teenage girls, young women, showing off their mastectomy scars, doing shots of testosterone, prancing around and making medical transition look really fun. And it just plants the idea into a vulnerable mind that maybe I'm trans, maybe I need my breasts cut off. the messaging is important, and the messaging that we are basically, the messaging of the trans rights movement that we are telling these kids is, if you hate your body, you could be trans. Now, for any social contagion to spread and flourish, a bad idea or a behavior has to land in fertile mind. And you cannot find any more fertile mind for this idea that if you hate your body, you could be trans, than every adolescent on the planet, because they're going through puberty. It's horrible. You do hate your body, and it's very uncomfortable, and they get exposed to this idea, and it sends them off in the wrong direction. And then the last, so the medical world. While all these four things are happening, all of the cultural factors, all of the technological factors, while it's all happening, the medical world completely loses its moral and ethical compass, forgets the Hippocratic Oath to first do no harm, largely because of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, that presents itself as a medical organization, but really it's just an extremist trans activist group full of all the trans activists who push this whole idea in the first place, and WPATH is suggesting that being trans is natural and healthy and something to celebrate. So there are consequences to untethering a generation of young people from reality at the behest of an extremist political movement. And this ghastly crime on the screen here is the consequence. These innocent young people are the victims of this fictional world that the modern trans rights movement created. When trans activists decided that it was not a mental illness and that extreme body modification was something to celebrate, and then they bombarded these poor kids with the messaging, they just got swept up in something much bigger than they ever could have understood. And then look at what happened to them. They just caught up in a culture-bound syndrome that can only exist in a nation that is touched by modern trans activism, gender identity ideology, and the absolute madness of celebrating this medical crime. So what can we do? Now, it's easier said than done for sure, but I'm in the US, and you guys, there's hope for you. I live in Canada, there's no hope for us. There's hope for you. You have these executive orders that are restoring reality and getting rid of all this nonsense, so I think you can actually pull this off. The first thing, it's obvious, you have to get every last remnant of gender identity ideology out of your education system and out of society. It's a poisonous idea, it's a poisonous lie, and it is harming young people, as we've just seen on the previous screen. As well, as soon as you've done that, the next one becomes, the next one will just happen naturally. As soon as you get rid of gender identity ideology, we will stop celebrating trans-identified celebrities, because if you take away gender identity ideology, you see that people who identify as transgender have either a paraphilia or a psychiatric disorder, and you realize that celebrating people who identify as trans and putting them on the cover of a magazine is exactly like celebrating an anorexic celebrity and putting an emaciated anorexic celebrity on the cover of a magazine. So as soon as you clear the fog, if you get rid of gender identity ideology that befuddles everyone, you can see clearly just how mad it is to be celebrating this medical treatment. Now, end WPATH, I think we're doing rather well. We're almost there, and I think if we keep going on the discrediting WPATH, one day soon, they will, at the very least, nobody is going to listen to this organization, and then we can remove the entire concept of gender identity from the field of medicine, because doctors need to be able to see their patients. They shouldn't be treating identities. They shouldn't be treating a belief system. They should be treating the patient who is there before them. And so if you get rid of the concept of gender identity, the doctors can see whether they've got a paraphilic man or whether they've got a homosexual with internalized homophobia, or if they have just a whole bunch of confused adolescents who have mistaken their pubertal woes for a sign that they're transgender. If you get rid of this made-up concept, you can help people who identify as transgender. Now, the next one, I'm with Jonathan Haidt. For the social media, smartphones, I'm with Jonathan Haidt. We need a parenting revolution, and we need to bring back end phone-based childhood and adolescence. We don't give your children a phone. Don't give your adolescent a phone. Don't let them on social media. It can be done. I know, because I have 3 children and they don't have phones and they don't have social media. And it would be great if other parents would join me in that, so my children don't constantly give me grief for it. And the last one, messaging is important. Really, really important when you're growing and maturing. So instead of, like, if a young person hates their body, that's not because they're trans. You tell them it's because you're going through puberty, and it gets better. Life gets easier. You just need time to grow and mature, to settle into who you are, settle into your sexual identity, and become a fully formed adult. But you don't need to rush into lifelong medicalization, because it's absolutely not going to solve any of your problems. And so when we've achieved all that, which I believe we can, then I think to close, I would just say we need to never again sacrifice an entire generation of children to the demands of extremist political activists. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mia. I just find this absolutely incredible, how people can look at the data that you present, we see the numbers, and then not actually recognize or admit that it is an epidemic that we're facing. This is a little bit low, I think, for Colin, for sure. So anyway, but I am a data person. I love data analysis. That's my focus in my study. And it's just mind-blowing that people can just turn their eyes off, their brain off, when you see the reality in front of us. I'm also a Jonathan Haidt person. I think we need a parenting revolution. I actually think if anyone tuned in for or read our last month's book club, was Why Meadow Died. And at the very end of it, it's actually a very challenging book, because at the end in particular, it's about the Parkland shooter from 2018. And there's this whole uprising for the parents to get on the school board, and then they don't win. They don't make it. And there's a question that's posed by someone, and I just can't remember who it was in the book, and they say like, how did we get to this point? And it's really across all of these topics that we are covering at M4LU. It's because we got wrapped up. We let ourselves as parents get wrapped up in the world. We bought the lie. We bought the lie that we needed the big house. We needed to go on all the vacations. We needed the FOMO experience, right? Like, we had to do it. And so we got moms into the workplace, or both parents, whichever way we need to think about it, so that there was no one raising our kids, except for send them off to daycare, send them off to schools, get them in schools all day long. And it's just so sad, and one of the first things that we do need to change, I believe, is getting our kids off phones. So, okay, that's my little soapbox on that. Next speaker, I'm very excited. So now we've seen the queer theory and the foundation of how it paved the way for gender ideology to be accepted, because it goes completely against everything normal in reality. We heard about the social contagion and how this is just overtaken the world, and now I'm very excited to have Colin Wright come up and bring us back to reality a little bit, but we'll see how queer theory has been applied to biology. So Colin Wright is an evolutionary biologist, advisor, and for the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, founding editor of Reality's Last Stand, and a fellow at the Manhattan Institute. He writes mainly about science, the biology of sex and sex differences, and gender identity ideology. His writing has been published in major news outlets such as the Wall Street Journal, Newsweek, the New York Post, Quillette, and others. Please help me welcome Colin. I don't know where we want to move that.
Hopefully this works. Might need to be up a little higher. Let's see here. tighten this up. Okay, that should be good. Okay, so I'm really excited to be giving a talk here. I think that Mia and Logan really set up my talk for what it's going to be about, the whole queer theory. My talk is going to be really about sort of foundational biological concepts that queer theory is being applied to sort of undermine basic ideas about biology. And it's going to talk about how a lot of these attacks by queer theory are leading to a lot of the insane things that we're seeing today, just attacking basic concepts, long-standing biological concepts that up until yesterday everyone seemed to agree upon. So my title is The Sex Binary and Queer Theory's Attack on Biology. So I think to start out, it's important to know about, well, what do biologists mean when we're talking about sex? So it's good to start maybe about sexual reproduction. So this is where two individuals combine their genomes to reproduce and form a totally unique offspring from the genes of one parent and the genes of the other parent. Species that do that are said to engage in sexual reproduction. And when we're talking about what males and females are, we're talking about two different evolved reproductive strategies, okay? One of these reproductive strategies involves creating fewer but very large gametes. These are the sex cells. These are called eggs or ova. And the other reproductive strategy is by producing very many but much smaller and less costly gametes, and these are called sperm, okay? So these are just straight observations in nature. These are two reproductive strategies we see across many different species. If we want to apply the concept of male or female to individual organisms, this is pretty straightforward. A female is an individual of the sex characterized by a reproductive system with the biological function of producing eggs or ova. And then a male, similar here, is an individual of the sex characterized by a reproductive system with the biological function of producing sperm. Importantly, this is not just a concept that is unique to humans, okay? This is, we're not just making it up here. This is actually a universal principle across any species that reproduces by fusing gametes of two different sizes, whether you're an elephant or a fish or a butterfly, any animal, any plant, most fungi, and a lot of algae too. Anytime you see a reproductive strategy that involves fusing one large and one small gamete, this system is said to have sexes, okay? And then I defined sexes earlier, what those are. So one thing I should probably clarify here, because it's often misconstrued, not just by sort of the gender activists, but also I think there's a lot of confusion on our side of things. A lot of people think that the sex binary refers to whether you're XX or XY, okay? We'll hear people say that sex is determined by your chromosomes. And that's not a false statement, but it's kind of misleading because biologists use the term determined in a slightly different way. So when we say that sex is determined by chromosomes, what we mean as biologists is that there are sex determination systems, and these can be thought about as sort of the upstream causes that cause an embryo to develop down a pathway that will result in a male or a female. So a traditional thing that activists will do here is they'll say, well, if sex is determined by chromosomes and XX and XY is the sex binary, well, what about these individuals who are XXY or XYY or XXX? That doesn't seem very binary. This is sort of their attempt to undermine the sex binary here. But what they're just talking about is sex determination systems. So humans, mammals generally, birds, we have what are called chromosomal sex determination. And all this means is that genes on our chromosomes are what causes us to develop down a pathway that leads to us to turn into males or females in utero. But this isn't a universal thing. So other species, think about alligators or turtles, for instance, they have what's called environmental sex determination systems. Specifically, the temperature at which their eggs are incubated determines whether they develop into male or female, okay? So it's not about sex chromosomes here. So we can think about sex determination systems, how sex is determined as being an upstream cause of sex. And then we have the middle bar here, which is what sex you are. So no matter how you get there, no matter what sex determination system there is, the sex you are is simply determined by the type of gamete you have the function to produce, universally. But then a lot of activists want to bring in even more to the discussion here, and they want to look at sex differences more broadly, differences in morphology, physiology, behavior, and these can just be thought of as
downstream consequences of sex. Okay, so it's just important to bracket all these concepts because activists want to include all of this into what it means to be male or female. All we're talking about is the middle bar here, gamete production, male or female. The sex determination systems aren't binary. The morphology, physiology, and behavior, that's not binary, but sex still is, okay? Sex is always defined universally by gamete production. Okay, so a lot of popular media outlets, they are trying to just undermine this fundamental concept in biology. This is a long-standing, hundreds-of-year-old concept ever since we've had microscopes being able to identify that males are producing sperm and females are producing ova. So we have the New York Times, they're saying that sex is not binary. We have Discover magazine saying that skeletal studies apparently reveal that sex, like gender, exists along a spectrum. There's entire books. There's nonprofits like the Trevor Project, Scientific American. I could go off on Scientific American, they're probably the most egregious example of all this. San Francisco Chronicle, they say that the sex binary is a scientific falsehood. And then an important one to point out here is the Washington Post. They say, to understand biological sex, look at the brain, not the body. And we'll come back to that because that plays an important role in sort of the basis for justifying gender-affirming care. But a lot of what I've commonly encounter is a lot of people say, well, these are just popular news outlets, these are magazines, these are newspapers. Is this in the scientific journals? Not only is it in the journals, it's in the top scientific journals. So this is an article published in Nature, the most prestigious scientific journal in the world by a long shot, or at least was, in my estimation. And apparently sex has been redefined. I was unaware of this. The idea of two sexes is simplistic, apparently, and that biologists now think that there is a wider spectrum than that. So this article, coming from the very top, is kind of what really got me out from behind my lab bench and onto Twitter posting about this stuff, because until then it was just on like a bunch of Tumblr blogs and things like that, like the crazies, and it was kind of isolated. But really, this set off a cascading event of more and more articles being published like this. So I'm just going to briefly go over just a couple of them by title only, but there are an essentially infinite number of these papers out there now. Integrative and comparative biology says that animal sex is now multivariate. Breaking binaries leads to a better understanding of ecology and evolution. It does not, I promise you. We have really crazy stuff like this. We have the gender sex 3x3, measuring and categorizing gender sex beyond binaries. They won't even say the word sex by itself. It's got to be gender sex or sex gender because they're so intimately entwined we can't possibly tear them apart, apparently. And then there's hormones and behavior, deconstructing sex strategies for undoing binary thinking. Again and again, there's so many of these papers. I'm going to stop there by highlighting them. But essentially, all of these scientific papers, all the academics that are behind this, including the New York Times and other popular media outlets, they're the reason we have insane things happening in our society, like straight up biological dudes competing in women's sports, going in women's prisons, going in women's bathrooms. And the more insane thing that Mia highlighted a lot is the pediatric sort of gender medicine thing, the reason we're transitioning kids. All of this fundamentally rests on this idea that sex is really like no particular thing. This is what Logan highlighted in with queer theory, that you can't really pin it down. Everything's kind of a spectrum. If you think it's binary, it's because you're in power, you're bigoted, you're trying to uphold some sort of power structures or something like that. And it kind of looks like this. So the sex spectrum doesn't think any individuals are actually male or female. It just wants to sort of smear us all into this concept of maleness and femaleness. We're just kind of like this statistical sum of our various body parts. Presumably we could maybe take measurements and find out where on the sex spectrum we belong, but fundamentally it relies on this fact that because there are some people who they want to call intersex, they have genitalia that appears somewhat ambiguous between male and female, that therefore there's kind of a blur at this line between male and female. And if there is a blur there in their reasoning, then you can't draw a definitive line. And if no one can really draw a definitive line, then who are we going to give the authority to draw these lines? Well, nobody. So we let people be the kind of ultimate authority of themselves, and they can just define themselves into any sex category that they want to. And this leads to the insane things of people like Leah Thomas, who's 100% biological male, who does not have an intersex condition, is somehow now allowed to compete in the female category. So I think this quote by Alice Drager, she's a historian of science, really kind of encapsulates the queer theory mindset, how it's applied to sex. So when she uses the word hermaphroditism, keep in mind she's referring to these intersex people with ambiguous genitalia, or sort of a mixture of sexual anatomy parts. So she said, hermaphroditism causes a great deal of confusion, more than one might at first appreciate, because, as we will see again and again, the discovery of a hermaphroditic body raises doubts not just about the particular body in question, but about all bodies. The questioned body forces us to ask what exactly it is, if anything, that makes the rest of us unquestionable. Now, if you're like a humanities major and you haven't really had many biology classes, you didn't see the first half of my talk, this might seem like a really profound statement. You might have an epiphany and be like, oh my goodness, yes, we're all questionable. We all don't, what is our sex really? The problem with this quote is it's just plain false. So if I were to be like really generous here and make my own version of the sex spectrum, it would look something like this, where we have the vast majority of people are like unambiguously male or female, 100%, not by a percentage. It's kind of like flipping a coin. You don't get 75% of heads or tails on one flip. You're either kind of either or, male or female. Now there's this little white box, and this is labeled intersex. It's actually 0.018%, but close enough here. And the truth is, this is just people who appear sexually ambiguous at birth based on just sort of observing their genitalia. But this number can shrink by about 100-fold if you just do a few more tests. And then, to the degree that anyone is truly sexually ambiguous, it's important to also note that this is not a third sex. People who might have some sexual ambiguity, it's not a third sex. And their existence certainly doesn't call into question anybody else's sex, as Alice Drager would like to have us believe. So she's just wrong about this. It's a total non sequitur to say that because some people are questionable, we're all questionable, okay? So that's kind of the argument from like the intersex conditions that's commonly used, but a lot of the gender activists go a little further than just dwelling on intersex conditions. They want to bring about or talk about secondary sex characteristics. Okay, these are the traits that evolve, or not evolve, but develop during puberty. Okay, it's what sort of makes us a sexually dimorphic species. So males, for instance, we develop Adam's apple, lower voices, more facial hair, broader shoulders, more body hair, increased muscle mass. Females, they develop breasts, they have broader hips, and we have differences in fat distribution all over our bodies. These are secondary sex characteristics, and they're called secondary for a reason, because they're just sort of the, as my slide before, they're the downstream consequences of one's sex. So the gender ideologues, what they don't think that sex is something that applies to your body. They want to say that only traits are sexed. So they wouldn't want to say that I am a male. They would want me to say something like, I have male chromosomes, I have male hormones in my body, male levels of hormones, I have a male sounding voice, I have male facial hair, that type of stuff. They want to break this all out into different traits, a trait by trait analysis of an individual's sex. So you could have some part of your body that is incongruent sex with another part of your body, okay? And this is something we see, here it is again, the gender-bred person. I think Mia highlighted the gender identity aspect of this, but there's also a box for biological sex, and that's what I'm going to zoom in on there. And you can see this concept of sort of this piecemeal trait-by-trait analysis of what makes someone sex. So here we have, again, they won't use the word male or female. It's all this smear of maleness and femaleness. And it is both emerging. It's not even a spectrum here. It's kind of coming out of zero and all the way to femaleness and maleness. But they say the traits that go into what makes someone more or less female is the physical sex characteristics you're born with and develop, including genitalia, body shape, voice pitch, body hair, hormones, and chromosomes. Okay, so they're literally saying that a girl who has more body hair than another girl is maybe less of a girl and more of a male. A woman who has larger breasts is more female than a female who doesn't have a large breast. I mean, this is sort of the sexist endpoint that a lot of this gender ideology takes you to. And one important point here is, since they don't believe that sex is a property of bodies but individual traits, this also applies to the brain as well, okay? This composite view of sex is really consequential because it's the justification for gender-affirming care. Because it stands to reason that if sex doesn't apply to bodies but just individual body parts, most of which can be altered with hormones and surgeries, that means that these interventions literally change your sex along the sex spectrum if we were to give people these treatments. So this view, this sort of piecemeal idea and the idea of brain sex, combined with the idea that you can have a sex incongruent with your body, this serves as the justification and basis for transitioning kids, okay? Because right now, brain sex is being equated with gender identity. They're used interchangeably. When I give expert testimony, this is what all the experts are saying in their expert testimony. They're saying gender identity or brain sex. So this is where they're going with it. They want to say that you literally are in the wrong body. You have a sex that is incongruent with your body. So it looks something like this. So here's kind of the logic behind gender-affirming care. On the top here we have, let's just call this your biological sex, your bodily sex. They would say sex assigned at birth. And then beneath that we have your brain sex, because these are two different things in their world. So let's say that you're a woman, you're a girl, you're pretty stereotypically feminine appearing. They would say that, oh, look, your sex assigned at birth is female. You're right there on the sort of bodily sex spectrum. But let's say that you're very sex non-conforming. You're like your personality, preferences, and behaviors are very much, right in line with most of the boys in your class. You like rough and tumble play. You watch monster truck rallies. Super stereotypical. Maybe you're same-sex attracted too. They would say that this means your gender identity or your brain sex is kind of over here on the boys' side. Okay, and then you'll notice here is that we have this gulf. We have this brain-body mismatch, and the definition of being transgender that you'll hear a lot is someone whose gender identity does not match the sex that they were assigned at birth. And so this little brain-body mismatch, this is what it means to be transgender in their view. This is the source of gender dysphoria, because some people, this brain-body mismatch causes them great distress. And so the premise of gender-affirming care is we're going to give this person hormones and surgeries to close that delta between your bodily sex and your brain sex and achieve gender euphoria or whatever the outcome is here. So I think to call this science, it's quite absurd. This, I would classify it as just rank pseudoscience. We've heard, I think Logan used the term, Mia also used the term. That's all it is. It has no basis in reality. And it's no wonder that every systematic review of the evidence performed to date has shown that there's no good evidence of benefit from these procedures, and a mountain of evidence, a mountain of known harms. Okay, this sterilizes individuals. These are permanent things that you can do. You cannot go back from this. This is exactly the outcomes I think you would expect if you base a medical practice on absurd pseudoscientific assumptions, like that sex is a mutable spectrum, that a child can have a brain sex that doesn't match his or her bodily sex, and that cross-sex hormones or amputating a girl's healthy breasts or inverting a boy's functional penis is going to benefit them in any way. Of course it's not, because it's based in nonsense, okay? The fundamental principle, the premise of it all is complete bollocks. So I don't think we need more outcomes data on this type of stuff. We don't need to do more randomized controlled trials for a field of medicine rooted in fantasy, rooted in pseudoscience. So until gender medicine obtains a firm grounding in biological reality, it needs to be rejected entirely, okay? So that reality is actually very simple from a biological point of view. That reality says that sex is immutable, at least in humans and mammals. If you're a clownfish, well, we can talk again. And it's based on the type of gamete an individual's reproductive system has the biological function to produce. there are only two types of sexes, and there only can be two sexes, male and female, because there are only two gametes, sperm and ova. There's no intermediate gamete. Sex cannot be a spectrum, okay? You do not get a spectrum from these two very large, and the disparity is actually much larger than this image leads on. And then this fact, the existence of males and females, has been true for about 600 million years ever since it evolved, and it will remain true as long as complex multicellular life continues to exist in our universe. So it's time to get back to biological reality. Thank you so much.
I'm not that tall, so I'm just going to hold it. So thank you all so much for holding on. We had some great presentations. Time for a quick bathroom break at home, or go ahead and submit your questions in through the Q&A feature. We'll still do that, and give us a minute while we rearrange the stage, and we'll be right back. Hello? There we go. Okay. Thank you again for joining us. Welcome back. I hope everyone had a good, quick little break. If you have any questions, again, just a quick reminder, you can submit them through the Q&A feature on the chat. Please do so. We are very excited and this is awesome to have you guys here to be able to ask all these questions. I was just joking with Colin that I could talk about this all night long, but these lights are really hot, so I won't keep them here all evening. So I'm going to start off right away, actually. Mia, there was something you touched on real briefly, and actually, well, there's two things, and I'll let you take the order that you want to talk about it. But when we first met, you talked about everyone thinks of John Money and Kinsey as the architects, but they don't. But really, what you were talking about was modern trans activism, and you said a name that I had not really heard of before, which is Martine Rothblatt. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, because it's just such an interesting point.
Sure. So, yeah, is it on?
Yeah, a little closer.
Is it?
Hold it
Okay,
closer.
there we go. Yeah, we always talk about John Money and the gang in the 1960s. And they are relevant, but really Martine Rothblatt, almost nobody talks about this man. So he's a man who thinks he's a woman. He actually made a robot version of his own wife. He lives with a robot version of his wife, which is not relevant to this topic at all, but still kind of interesting. And so he was very influential in the earliest days of modern trans activism. And so it's crucial to understand him and those who were, I talked about it a little bit in my talk. The goal was to redefine being transgender as perfectly natural and healthy. And they were playing the long game. They wanted to lay out the legal framework so that when it came time to launch, all the nations, governments around the world would protect gender identity, and they wouldn't focus on, the autogynephilia and the paraphilias and stuff. And so Rothblatt wrote this really interesting book called The Apartheid of Sex. Actually, Colin, have you read it?
I haven't.
Okay. I think the first chapter would give Colin an aneurysm. The title of the first chapter is, if I remember correctly, 5 billion sexes.
It's the most ever.
Right. So it's this completely crazy book where he dismantles everything about what it is to be male and female, and then reconstructs this entire mad world in which men can be women. Sex is a spectrum, well, that everybody has their own individual sex. And he even goes so far as to talk about pronouns, how we should just stop using gendered pronouns altogether to avoid using sex language, so that you're not calling a man he, you're not calling a woman she. So he had a vision. He's, in my mind, and I should point out that he's a very wealthy man. He's got an enormous amount of money. I will direct you to the work of Jennifer Billick if you want to understand the funding behind all of this, but I can tell you that these trans-identified individuals at the beginning who were, as I said in my talk, creating a whole new reality in which they could be women and women could be men, they were very well funded, and they played the long game. Everything was going on behind the scenes, and nobody knew anything about it. They had the money to fund the conferences. They had the money to get all of these experts together to draw up this completely mad reality, and that's the reality that we live in today.
That was really surprising to me to see. I know, Logan, you talked about the queer theory, which is actually the next thing I want to lead to with that, because it answers again, where did this come from? Why are they doing this? And also, how the heck can they? Well, it's because there's so many people who have so much money. But it really is intentional. It's really intentional. Logan, when you said, it makes me wonder if he maybe had queer theory training or something like that, because, but I thought it was super interesting the way that you mentioned, oh golly, now I can't think of the writer's name, who talked about education. Educators have to draw students into crisis.
Yeah, Kevin Kumashiro.
Yeah. So can you talk about that a little bit more? That was just so surprising to me.
Yeah.
That this is so intentional.
Yeah, that was an absolutely shocking paper, and I didn't have time in my talk to come back to it, so I'm sorry for that. I'll do it now. what Kevin Kumashiro was saying when he said educators have a responsibility to draw students into crisis, he was talking about crises related to gender identity, and crises related to your skin color, and crises related to your ethnicity, or whatever dimension of identity you want to choose. He was talking about drawing students into a crisis for that. Because again, with queer theory, everything is a social construct. It's a social fiction that someone at some point made up. Nothing is rooted in truth. So I come up with an idea today, and then if I've got the power over you to make all of society believe it over decades and decades or hundreds of years, however long you want to talk with sex, 600 million years, if I've got the power, then everyone adopts it and thinks it's normal, then it becomes true. So queer theory thinks nothing, absolutely nothing, can be an essential quality of your person. So the whole point of that paper was to tell educators we need to draw students into a crisis so they learn that male and female is made up, so that they learn that man and woman is a spectrum, so that they learn race is a social construct, whatever dimension you want to choose, so they learn that. And that launches them into a psychological crisis. Can you imagine being a young child, as young as in kindergarten or first, second, third, and fourth grade, being told, yeah, your whole life you've been told you're a boy, Tommy, but have you ever thought maybe you're a girl? What does it mean to be a boy? I mean, can you imagine what a child must think when they hear that, especially when everything is distilled into a fun, cute cartoon? We've got the genderbread unicorn and the gender unicorn and the genderbread man, and there's more. Your teacher's wearing one of the shirts I saw at one point was, if your parents are not accepting of your new identity, I'm your mom now. #momhugs with a cute polar bear on it. You can buy these shirts on Amazon. Now, imagine that an educator like Kumashiro, I would argue, is advocating for, gets their hands on a child at that young age and convinces them that there is no tether they have to reality. What that would do to a young developing mind at a time in life when it is super important that they realize there are distinctions that matter. There are males and females, and that difference matters. So yeah, that paper was talking about drawing them into that crisis. And then the second part of that was resolving the crisis productively. And that means initiating them into this doctrine where they think everything's make-believe. And they become little revolutionaries. It's structuring the learning experience to thrust them into the crisis and then pull them out on the side you want them on. So I read that stuff, and like I said, I think it was 2020. My wife was pregnant with our first son, and I could not believe it. Like I ran out to her, I think, and I was like, can you please read this, what this man is saying? Because this can't be right. Like I must be reading it wrong. There's another context, and there wasn't.
When was it from again?
2002.
Okay, so a long time ago. I mean, in all fairness, I am still one of those people who still thinks that 20 years ago was 1980, so I'm stuck in that. But I know it's not. I know reality. And I'm very aware that that was actually 20 years ago. That, to me, is just so shocking. I genuinely, just for this whole time, have thought, this has got to be a mistake. They could never have intentionally tried to do this.
And I'll add, too, because a lot of times I'll hear when I bring this up is, well, maybe it was one of those people who's just writing a dissertation for their committee, and no one will ever read it. But all of the people that I talked about tonight have thousands upon thousands of citations. They are the experts. They're the mainstream. They're the people the educators go to when they have questions about how to do things in their classroom and how to teach kids. Like they're mainstream people. They're at the top of the heap. They're not one crazy person with blue hair who's going through a crisis and maybe needs some help from a parent, but their parent doesn't know about it because the teacher is hiding those conversations. It's not that. These are legitimate experts in their field who have a tremendous sway in education.
Well, I appreciate everything you presented on it, honestly. That was just, that one, when I heard about queer theory, that really was another one that blew my mind, I would say. So I am going to jump over to Colin. You actually talked about this already, but I just kind of want to go back to it because I think this is such a good question. It's one that came in from the audience. Are the tiny amount of people who cannot be sex classified enough to break the sex binary and warrant a third sex? So I thought it was really interesting that you actually talked about this idea of a third sex. But you very briefly mentioned like the XXY And I know there's other combinations of chromosomes. Can you just kind of expand on that? And is it, how do we respond to that?
Yeah, there's a common misconception that when biologists say that sex is binary, we're saying that every human who's ever existed and currently exists and ever will exist can be just definitively placed into a male or female category. That's certainly true of the overwhelming vast majority of individuals, but sex is really, it's a product of development. And I at least hold out the possibility that there could be an ambiguous presentation of someone who's maybe not clearly classifiable as male or female. But the reason that, well, they're not a third sex because they don't have a reproductive system that's organized around the production of a third unique gamete that's other than sperm or ova. And sex ambiguity itself just isn't a third sex. So just because there are only two gametes, there are only two sexes that are available for people to be. So when biologists say that sex is binary, all we mean is there are only two sexes. Sex is composed only of two types of things. It's the reproductive strategy to produce either sperm or ova. So that's how I would address that.
So then is that why there was such a push to separate sex and gender as this social construct, this idea of not being directly connected to each other? Because you were talking about it, now they're saying gender sex together.
There is a push for people just to say gender sex or sex gender. They kind of go back and forth because they want to pretend like that they're just so intertwined we can't possibly separate the biological from the identity aspect of things. And again, this just arises from a fundamental misunderstanding of what it means to be male and female at the universal definition of the sexes. So I mentioned too that in the talk that a lot of this comes at the conflation of how sex is determined with how sex is defined. And I mentioned the sex determination mechanisms. The activists will use any source of variation that they can find in order to say that sex isn't binary. We've seen people like Anne Fausto Sterling, where they defined a male and female, or sorry, they defined an intersex person as anyone who deviates from the Platonic ideal of male or female. And so they had measurements like if the girl's clitoris is beyond this certain length, that's going to be considered atypical. If a boy's penis is below this certain, we're going to be considered atypical. So that definition really brought in so many individuals who are not sexually ambiguous at all into this intersex umbrella. That's where you get figures that are in the 2% range, or as common as red hair, we commonly hear them say, where it's really 100 times less than that, and even perhaps 1,000 times less than that too, because again, that tiny box of people who appear sexually ambiguous, that's just sort of at a glance at birth. You do a few more tests and that number almost goes to zero. So
that I think is fascinating. It's the way they twist language. So I really appreciate it. I think I heard that multiple times up here, the importance of being precise in language. And by the way, this is something I can't remember which event I saw it on, one of our previous events that someone was talking about, knowing that the language you're using, that we're using, is not the language or it's not the same definitions. And just even your definite explanation of how the word determination is used, because I don't think that's how most people think of it or they understand it to be. So that was really important. Real quick to the audience members, when you have a question, if you could just come over here on the side, that way I'll know that you have a question and I will hand you off my mic. Okay, so I have another one and I'm going to just pop this one up and any of you guys can grab it. Gender ideology is codified in the U.S. national curriculum. Teachers have been trained in critical pedagogy, which does undergird the ideology. Churches also don't call it out. How do we change this? That might be you, Logan, with the critical pedagogy.
What a great question. Yeah, the person who asked that question is absolutely correct. I didn't go into it tonight, but when I was talking about queer pedagogy, defined for the first time by Mary Kay Bryson and Susan DeCastle in 1993, what they were doing was they were taking queer theory and marrying it to something called critical pedagogy. And this could be a long part, so I'll just keep it short. Critical pedagogy is how you do the actual teaching in the classroom of these radical things. It's a method for using education as a mediator to political literacy. There's a critical pedagogy for critical race theory. You call it critical race pedagogy. There's a critical pedagogy for queer theory. That's queer pedagogy. There's critical pedagogies from this tradition for all of these different crazy radical theories that are out there. That's how you actually do the teaching. And it's very hard to root out because it often looks like a regular unit. So, for instance, you'll have a child in math class, and they're supposed to be, calculating how long it takes the family to drive the car to whatever, SeaWorld. And what the educator will do at first glance of the assignment, the parent sees, okay, this is a math question. But what's happening is the discussion in the classroom is about, well, who here has a family car? Raise your hand. And if someone doesn't raise their hand, it's, well, why might some families not have a car? Or who here has been to SeaWorld? Someone doesn't raise their hand. Okay, why might it be that some of you haven't been to SeaWorld? And you can see how that creates an environment where you can start having conversations about, well, why can't you afford it? Maybe it's because of your skin color. Or maybe you don't own a car because of X, Y, or Z. So these things are very hard to catch, and I tell parents all the time, it's not just looking at the assignments, because the critical pedagogy is designed to take whatever you're looking at it and turn it into radicalizing content through discussion with the teacher. And these people I quoted from their works, they all do this. This is a tradition that stretches all the way back. The generator was Paulo Freire in the 1960s. A big topic. If you want to read a great book on that, The Marxification of Education by Dr. James Lindsay really outlines that strategy. But if you want to find this stuff, it's not just looking at the assignments. You have to talk to the educators. You have to say, how are you teaching this in math class? Because if you don't do that, you won't see these radicalizing conversations that are taking place. It's very difficult to get out through law. I'm not sure how we do it, but I do know as a parent or a grandparent, you have control to look at the assignments and to talk to the educators doing them. It's a difficult task. One of the papers I didn't talk about was from some academics, Navigating Parental Resistance is the paper, and the entire paper is about how they overcome resistance to what they're doing in the classroom. And they say, well, when parents have a problem with this, we hide behind our English language arts state standards. We have to read the transgender book to your fourth grader, because what else would we read to get our ELA standards met? We have to do this. Or they use certain keywords to hide the agenda. It's a tough thing. Equip yourself with the knowledge to spot it by researching critical pedagogy and reading books like The Marxification of Education, and have conversations with educators. And if you can, I always recommend homeschool. That's pretty big. There's a very large growing community in the United States doing that, but I completely understand if you can't. Find parents that are like-minded and take control of your child's education, because it's my opinion that this is not, unfortunately, people don't like to hear this, something that just ends tomorrow. Everyone stopped talking about critical race theory in the last year, as if it's gone. It's still in schools. They're still practicing it with kids. So,
well, we talked about it in February.
yes, Moms for Liberty does a great job doing it, but the average parent on the street may think it's gone.
Yeah, I want to just reiterate your point about the overcoming parental objections, resistance. Yeah, it's so unfortunate, but people need to hang in there and be prepared for hard conversations, because and be aware that when they're hiding behind responses like that. Okay, we have a question here, please.
Yeah. So we talked.
Is it on? Or yeah, it's definitely on. Just talk a little closer to it.
We talked a lot today about gender ideology in K through 12 education, and how difficult adolescence can be for when kids are introduced to trans narratives. But your child doesn't stop being your child when they turn 18, and people tend to have far less sympathy for the decisions adults make. My question is for Mia. How do we help people understand that 18, 19, and 20-year-olds are still a vulnerable group, often just as impressionable as they were when they were 16 years old?
Thank you.
Yes, good question. That's been my thing for a long time. We all focus on children because it does seem to be just such an egregious crime to do this to a child, someone under 18. but I actually think that the 18 to 25 age group is the most at risk, because you're still developing, you're still not, the brain isn't finished maturing. I know we repeat this over and over, but it really is true that the brain doesn't completely finish maturing until around the mid to late 20s. And as well, I think these days there's this new concept called the emerging adult. It's this new stage where there's a lot of, not everyone agrees with it, but I think there's some value to it in that we're getting married later, we're buying houses later. All of the adult milestones that would ground you and give you stability in your life come about a decade later than they did in the past. And if you combine that with the immature brain, and then you combine it with the just unbelievably pseudoscientific messaging, the impact of social media and the medical world that has completely lost its mind, it means that 18 to 25, they're the most at risk. And I like to compare it to vasectomies and tubal ligation, in that you would never find a medical professional who would ever perform a vasectomy or a tubal ligation on an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old. Under 25, I think it would be very, very, very difficult to find one willing to do it, because doctors know that young people will, I was one of them, I was absolutely 100% certain that having children would be the very worst thing that could ever possibly happen to me, all the way up till I was about 28. And then someone flipped a switch inside me and baby fever hit me full force. And I had to have 3 children, and I had 3 children, one after the other. I was a stay-at-home mother, I was breastfeeding, co-sleeping. And everyone understands that. Everyone knows that that's a completely normal developmental trajectory. And everyone in the medical world understands that, outside of the field of gender-affirming, so-called gender-affirming medicine. And that's because gender-affirming medicine is under the sway of political activism, and they have forgotten everything that they know about adolescent and young adult development. So I think drawing attention to that side of it, that no doctor would ever perform birth control sterilization on anyone outside of gender medicine, is a good way to highlight the risk. And I don't know, like, I personally remember what I was like in my early 20s. I was an idiot. Like, ask people to recall what they were like. Of course.
I support that. About me, not you. I didn't know you then.
Oh, I really was. Believe me, I really was. Everybody, we all remember what we were like. So I think just reminding everyone to think back to how stupid they were, and then imagine like making a decision that is going to impact you for the rest of your life.
I would almost, real quick, I want you to respond to, I would almost go a step further and say, because I have some amazing children that are going through this very interesting time of life, of early 20s. And I remember so vividly, you think you know everything. So it's almost worse, because you're now past this time where kids are like, oh yeah, of course I don't know everything, I'm a kid. But then you're like, no, I know everything. And then when they're told, well, yeah, of course well, definitely. It's just very unfortunate. So.
No, that's really important. Can I just add, I don't know if I said it, but I should say, the reason that I think they're the most at risk is because as soon as they hit 18, they can consent. At the very least, minors, if they have parents who are standing up for them and trying to protect them, they can not sign that consent form. But the 18-year-old, nothing magical happens at midnight when you turn 18. There's no developmental stage, there's no massive leap in maturity, and so they can sign the consent forms, and that's what I think makes them the most at risk.
I just want to add briefly to that, because in my talk I laid out sort of the pseudoscience that's the foundation for all of these procedures. You know, it's rooted in the pseudoscience of the sex spectrum, of brain sex. And so just because someone turns 18 doesn't mean they don't deserve evidence-based medicine to be applied to their biology. You know, they still deserve to have, you know, proper studies of outcomes and actually benefit from this type of care. You know, but there's just no good evidence that it's really effective. So yeah, it needs to be grounded back in reality before we can even, you know, say that adults should be able to consent to this stuff. You can't consent to these types of procedures because there's no good evidence, you know, that they actually are beneficial in any way.
Well, and you pointed out too, there's actually a lot of evidence to the opposite, right?
There's just a whole host of known harms. We know that if you take puberty blockers as a boy and you go on to cross-sex hormones, like, you will be sterilized for the rest of your life. Like, is this something that we can let a prepubertal child consent to? I certainly don't think that's the case. So,
well, and as the prepubertal part is sad, and in my opinion, you very briefly talked about, oh golly, I'm going to probably use the wrong word, but the vaginoplasty, right, of inverting, making a fake vagina, basically. And now when you use puberty blockers, they're finding that they don't have anything to do that with. So because the child never developed, which is awful in every way, and then there's just more problems added on in reality. So that just breaks my heart. We have another question here.
Logan, I know, is this on? Probably not close enough. Okay. Logan, I know you talked about how educators stand behind the standards that have been established as an excuse as to why they need to do something. Here in our county, we're confronting the same situation now, where the state standards say in high school that the kids need to learn about gender ideology and gender theory. We're fortunate from the standpoint we have several conservatives on our school board, and they have asked for us to come up with some brief, like white papers or something, that can give the alternative side when the kids have to learn about gender theory and gender ideology. So do any of you have a recommendation on a source that we could use? Of course, it has to be rather brief, not a whole book, to help us out so we can give it to our school board and perhaps at least make it a balanced discussion.
Sorry, so is it materials teaching gender but from a place grounded in reality? Is that what you mean?
Yes, because they're going to teach gender theory as it's being explained in the public right now.
Yes, so I'm the director of GenSpect Canada, but there's GenSpect International, there's a GenSpect USA, and there are alternative school guidelines for how to, because you're right, like, you can't just get rid of all of this. We live in this culture, we're immersed in this culture, and it's everywhere. So we have to guide children through this mad time. If you look on, we can talk afterwards, but if you look on the GenSpect website, you'll find the school guidance, and it's just an alternative that acknowledges where we are.
Okay, good, thank you.
Thank you.
And I can add something to that just briefly, because I think it's an important point that both Mia and Colin tangentially hinted at, and that is that for decades now, people who have gone into higher education have learned this stuff. This stuff has been out there at least since the early 1990s. And they didn't just take this information into teaching. They also took it into law and into business and into every profession imaginable. So now when you as a parent want to combat this and you say this isn't right, the school says, well, this is what the experts say. I mean, here's our resident psychologists. You should go see them, see what they say. And then you go to see the psychologist, and of course they say, you must affirm. You must do this. The school is right. We've got to hop on this plan. So this is a really, really difficult fight because there's pressures from below. There's a big saying in these circles, as below, so above, as above, so below. There's pressures from below where these people who go to institutions of higher learning go into professions and they push back down. So you've got activists from the ground level who are pushing up, and then you've got all of the money from countless organizations. UNESCO is a huge one. The United Nations Education, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. All of these NGOs just pouring money downward to support these radicalized people going into the profession. So one thing I tell people, if there's anything you can do to work on the problem of higher education, I mean, if we don't root out that pipeline and stop what they're doing, it's going to be very difficult to stop at any other point down the chain.
Yeah, it's almost like cutting off weeds at the ground level and not pulling out the root. Because that really is the truth. We need to focus on all the schools, not just our children's schools. I agree.
Can I just add one point? Relevant to this is I have 3 children, and I think each of us you should never be afraid to speak the truth to your child. You should never be afraid to tell your child the truth. And I did do homeschooling. I homeschooled for 2 years. And during my homeschooling time, because I live in Canada, so my children are in the public school system in Canada, it's completely mental. We did the genderbread person, the gender unicorn. I pulled all of these materials and I showed them in an age-appropriate way that wasn't stressful for them, and it was kind of fun. Why it's nonsense. So these things don't exist. We even, I recall, did, there's a book, The Non-Binary Bunny. I don't know if you've come across that. You can't even believe it's real, but it's not satire. You read it and you think it's got to be a joke, but it's not. And it's this non-binary bunny, and there's neo-pronouns in there. So I read that with my children, and then we laughed at it, and then for the rest of the day they were using neo-pronouns for each other. So you can show them what's going on, try and make it fun, but protect them. Make sure that they know that it's not true. And just right now, there are a lot of people that believe it is true, and they're not doing it because they want to harm children. They think they're helping by teaching it, but it's really, none of it is real.
I just want to add a super quick point. That is such important advice, because that Queering Critical Literacy and Numeracy for Social Justice book, it's 200 pages. In that book, there are 2 boy students in this class where this educator is trying to do this. And it's not just for one lesson or one unit, it's the whole purpose of the class, so like a semester long. And these 4th and 5th grade boys won't do any of the assignments. It's very clear their parents had gotten to them before this educator could sink their hooks in, because every time they're supposed to be researching suicide rates, they're researching turtles. And that always gives me hope, because she just laments page after page after page about these 2 boys who will not go along with it. Every time they're asked to speak, they're talking about turtles. And it's clear that a mother or a father who cares deeply about those boys got to them first and said, listen, you expect this, and this is what you're going to do when that happens. So I completely back up that point.
There is, I'm not going to quote the study well at all. I just don't remember what it was, but I know I've heard it, that there's real strength. There's more authority given, I believe, to whatever their first source is of information. It's like you're breaking fertile ground there. And so it's absolutely critical that we as parents approach these topics that are not always comfortable. They're often very not comfortable, but if you present it to kids and give them a framework, then they can compare everything against it. And that really, that's so critical. It really, really is. So non-binary bunny, and we'll come over here. So we got a question that, Colin, I think you'll be able to answer related to the non-binary bunny. Can someone define what it means when someone identifies as non-binary?
Yeah. So the activists, they have a concept known as the gender binary and the gender spectrum, and that's distinct from the sex binary and the sex spectrum. So for the sex binary, this is, what I would call the sex binary is the sperm and ova. That's the binary nature. They think the sex spectrum, is, maleness on one side, females on the other side. But then they have this idea of the gender spectrum that's really just kind of rooted in stereotypes based on an individual's sex. So you've even seen, I think it was Mermaids that had that sign or that diagram that had like G.I. Joe on one side and Barbie on the other, and everywhere in between was just sort of like variations of how masculine and feminine individuals are. So if you don't identify with sort of the most extreme G.I. Joe or the Barbie gender identity, or that is reflective of who you are in the inside in terms of masculinity or femininity, that means that you're non-binary, because you don't ascribe to the binary social construct of gender, which is sort of the stereotypes that we apply to individuals based on their perceived sex. So that's what they mean. That's all they mean. It's just a word of saying, we used to just call these people androgynous, gender non-conforming people. That's really all it boils down to in the end.
All right, that makes sense. Thank you. We have another question here.
Yes, and this is for all 3 of you, what are your suggestions to be included in a FOIA request to school districts to determine how embedded gender and ideology is in the schools?
I've never actually done a FOIA request, so I'm a bad person to ask about this.
Yeah, I've done it. One of their tactics they'll use when you make a request like that, and then I'll follow up with my advice, is they'll respond with saying it's impossible to deliver this request because it would be so much information. We're going to have to charge you. You can get the request, we'll do it, but it's going to be $5,000 for you to get it, which is ridiculous. So what I've done in the past is, and it takes work. I mean, gather a team in your community to work on it, but just submit a lot of FOIA requests and be very, very specific with each one, as specific as you possibly can be. Make it as easy as possible for them to go and find the information that they're looking for, because oftentimes they'll hide behind just saying, like, when I submitted, I think I was still getting documents like 400 days after my initial request. And I gave up because that was the first time I had done it, and I just asked for too much. There was too much in the request. So be as specific as possible. Get a group of friends together, or community members who are involved. Think of the important issues, the information that you want to know about, and really, really, really drill it down, and then just submit a ton of them.
Can you give an example when you say really specific? Could you give an example of what that looks like?
Yeah, so let's say a common one is your school district puts on a DEI training. Just ask for just the dollar amount that the district paid for that facilitation, and then submit a separate request for the materials. It can get a little tricky there, because oftentimes what will happen with the materials is the presenters will copyright them so that they cannot then share them with you. So ask for any notes they've taken based on the materials, or any emails submitted the week prior to when the event took place, rather than any emails at all, because if you do that, they may have had 50 emails, and God forbid that would take 5 years to go and find for you. So just, as specific as you possibly can be. In some districts are better about it than others. I know I have had districts that really, really try and give you the runaround, and it's very difficult to get the information. But others, I don't think they know what they're admitting to, so they'll just send it all to you. You submit a couple requests, they get back right away. Okay, maybe I'll make a couple additional requests and submit fewer of them, and they send it to you.
That's very helpful.
It's a dance, really.
Yeah, that's boy, red tape, bureaucracy. Go figure. We are right at 8. I know we have one more question. Are you able to make it quick, or should we? Can we do a quick one?
I can make it quick.
Okay, do it.
I know, I'm not sure if you alluded to this or not, Logan, but I just thought I would ask you. Over the past few years, there have been a few other societal constructs that have come up. BLM, things that create chaos and struggle in our society. Critical theory aims to create friction between people. Queer theory not only does that, but also creates a struggle within one's mind. Am I a boy? Am I a girl? Kind of the same concept. Would you say that this is just possibly another construct of that same critical theory platform?
Oh, yeah, certainly. Are you asking whether or not queer theory is, what would be called the critical
part
tradition?
of the same platform?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep, absolutely. It's I like to think of it as a tree with many branches that go off in different directions. They really, it's funny you say that the social construct stuff, because they really tie themselves in knot. I mean, it's not rooted in any stable reality or any positive truth. So you'll have queer theorists writing papers about how queer theory is a social construct, and who gets to determine what's included in queer theory and how we define these terms. And it's just this circle, dog chasing its tail constantly. So it's pretty funny. But yeah, I would say technically it comes from the critical Marxist tradition, really launching with the Frankfurt School and coming out from there. Yeah, a branch off from critical race theory and all of those. And they're all supposed to work together through intersectionality. That's like the glue that binds them, the one ring that combines all of the forces. But queer theory, in my estimation, is by far the most toxic, the most acidic, because it literally argues that there is no truth, no reality, nothing stable.
So before we fully wrap up, I want to give you each a chance if there's anything else you wanted to say, and please let everyone know where they can find you online for all your awesome insights. Start with you, Colin.
So I'm mainly on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Swipe Right. I have a publication called Reality's
Swipe
Last
Right
Stand.
Spelled?
Swipe Right, WRIGHT. and I have a website called Reality's Last Stand. It's a Substack-based publication that I run, and you can find most of my writings there, and also in City Journal for the Manhattan Institute, and that's about it.
It's on. I think I've said everything that I was hoping to say. So you can find me again on Twitter. I still call it Twitter, @_Cry Mia River, Mia MIA.
I love all of these puns. Logan, you better have a good one.
And yes, I'm with GenSpect. We have a lot of great resources at GenSpect if you're looking at how to guide a young person through this mad time, even if they are already swept up in it as well. If you're a parent of somebody already swept up in it, there's lots of support there.
Yeah, I guess the final thing I would say was like 5 years ago when I was preparing to be a dad, I had no background in any of this. So the thing I really try to stress to people is figure out whatever your skill set is. If this is something that interests you and pushing back against it, and you want to take action in your community, figure out what your skill set is and what you like to do, because if you don't like to do it, getting involved in this stuff, you won't last because it can be hell. So figure out what you like to do and how you like to do it, and find like-minded people. There are so many more resources like Moms for Liberty University now than there was 5 years ago when a lot of us were getting involved in this, or the last decade. So that's my optimistic point, is everyone is capable of doing something. Figure out what that is. There's lots of like-minded people working on these problems, and connect with them, and do whatever you can to protect your children and help right the ship. I'm Logan Lansing on Twitter. I have a podcast too, but it's so hit or miss because I've been having children over the last 5 years, and I do it when I can do it, but if you subscribe, I'm sorry. It may have been a year. I don't know. There's some stuff on there.
And sorry, I forgot. I have a podcast too. Beyond Gender, you can find us. We just launched on YouTube. It's we talk about gender, but also the wider issue, the wider cultural, what's going on in the culture that could have led to this madness.
All right. So I want to thank everyone again for coming tonight, for joining us for this incredible presentation. Thank you all three for these amazing presentations that you gave, and sitting under these very warm lights as we talked about such an incredible topic. Stay tuned. Coming up in April, we have some really exciting, three more events coming up for April. So we've got Gender 102, which is our virtual lecture. So it's like more of like a panel discussion almost. We're going to have the wonderful Billboard Chris on there, along with Jay Richards from the Heritage Foundation. And then our featured book this month is When Harry Became Sally. And that we're going to be talking with Ryan Anderson, the author, on Wednesday, April 23rd at 1 p.m. Eastern. I remember when that book was banned from Amazon, and I was like, what is going on? This is so weird. I'm particularly excited because I just recently secured our watch party for April, which is an absolutely phenomenal documentary. It is called No Way Back, The Reality of Gender Affirming Care. So I'm very excited to announce that watch party will be on April 29th. The live stream starts at 6:30 p.m. It is gated, so you will need to register, buy a ticket for it. And I'm telling you, it is so worth it. This movie is just absolutely incredible. And then, of course, you can always check out our resource library at M4LU.org to find all sorts of related articles, white papers, FOIA findings, documentaries, videos. I'm not going to lie, I definitely went down the rabbit hole on this one. I'm telling you, there's like hundreds of things on there. So hang in there and get through it. I promise there's really good stuff on there. Kind of mind-blowing. And coming up later in the year as well, we have in May, we're going to be talking about comprehensive sex education. And if you thought gender ideology was bad, I am telling you, you do not want to miss the events on comprehensive sex ed. It is absolutely horrifying. So as exciting as that sounds. In any case, thank you again. We really appreciate having your support. And we look forward to seeing you at our next events.